Brian Crowley, as bureau chief for the Palm Beach Post in Tallahassee, you had a front row seat to the 2 terms that Bob Graham served as Florida's governor. Thoughts today?
Bob Graham was a very unique governor in the state of Florida, a very unique U.S. senator. He was a man who really cared deeply about Floridians. And part of that came from his work days that he did. He did 400 work days in his lifetime. And when he did a work day, he did a real work day, whether he was being working on a garbage truck, working as a busboy, working as a school teacher. Long after the cameras and the press were gone, he did the whole day. He worked. There was nothing ever fake about it. And it really helped him engage with real Floridians. This is a guy who was a multimillionaire. His father had run for governor and lost. Uh, and he had gone to Harvard Law School. But his work days that he started when he first ran for governor really got him to understand the working people of the state. And it made an enormous impact on the kind of governor and the kind of man he became.
And in office, a Democratic governor, he wasn't afraid to go toe to toe with the Carter administration at the time, the Mariel boat lift, fighting for resources for Florida to deal with the influx of those coming from Cuba at that time. He always went to bat for Floridians.
You know, when I watched the governor during the various crises that did happen while he was governor, it didn't matter whether it was with Washington, it didn't matter whether it was with with legislators in Tallahassee. He fought for what he believed was right. He wasn't always right, but he fought for what he believed was right. And it didn't matter whether or not they were Democrats he was debating with or Republicans he was debating with. His goal was to get what he believed was the right thing. And very often, more than not, he was successful.
Was he ahead of his time in some sense? School competency testing he pushed for long before that became more of a trend and a push in Florida, a bigger push on salvaging the Everglades that he pushed for as he was governor of Florida. In some sense, was he a bit ahead of the politics of the time, or at least the issues that would become even bigger after he put them on the table?
You know, Bob Graham was always a man of vision for what he thought would be best for the long-term health of the state. So he would look at education reforms. He would look at protecting the environment in Florida. Uh, and he was the kind of guy that always tried to negotiate with people in good faith to accomplish things that he thought were important for the state. And his negotiating skills were successful enough where even people who thought maybe this isn't the path we should take would ultimately agree with him. And he was often willing to compromise in ways that helped get things done. His goal wasn't to be a hardcore Democrat or to fight with Republicans. His goal was to do what was best for Floridians and to do what it was necessary to get that done. And it was the kind of thing that we had seen a little bit of in previous governors like Reuben Askew and Leroy Collins. And it was sort of what was going on during that time. And Bob Graham was a remarkable leader in that sense. When Jeb Bush became governor, Bob Graham attended his inauguration. And in fact, Bob Graham told a great story while he was at talking at the inaugural. He talked about the first time anybody from Miami was going to ever be elected governor was going to be a cold day in Tallahassee. Well, it was unseasonably cold that day in Tallahassee when Jeb Bush got sworn in as governor. But then Bob Graham went a little further and reminded everybody that when he got sworn in, it actually snowed in Tallahassee that day. And the audience loved it. But that was the kind of thing, he didn't agree with Jeb Bush on a lot of issues, but he wasn't going to attack him. He was going to embrace him, and he was going to do what he could to work with him. And that's the kind of thing that we don't see enough of today. We need more Bob Grahams in the early days of Jeb Bush, people who were willing to work together to solve problems.
He went on to 3 terms as a United States Senator, each one garnering more of the votes, 60+% in his final race, enormously popular. Would later head the Senate Intelligence Committee. I want to talk to you a little bit about that and at least presidential run before heart problems and other things. He never really caught fire there. But before we do that, as bureau chief, you rubbed shoulders with him a lot, he with the press corps. Any funny stories, any direct memories of funny moment there?
Well, every year the press corps would have the press corps skits in which a big show would be put on with the members of the press performing, and the governor and the cabinet and the legislature and everybody who lived in Tallahassee practically would attend these events. Well, Bob Graham decided he was going to essentially take over the press corps skits by doing his own skits, and he would put on some remarkable performances before the press corps got started, and we would have no idea what he was going to do. One year he brought on Jimmy Buffett, and the two of them sang their version of a Margaritaville song, but it was Tallahasseeville. And in his final press corps skit, he put on a white military-looking uniform, marched onto the stage with the Marching 100 from FAMU, and the entire band playing as he announced that he was going to be governor for life. And
He'll be
he
in
had
the
a
hearts
great
of
sense of humor, and he was even at a press conference, he could be getting really tough questions thrown at him, and he'd handle those questions, and he would often do it with a sense of humor.
And moving on to his Senate career, he would ultimately become head of the Senate Intelligence Committee, one of the few senators who did not say yes to the conflict, the war against Iraq. He thought the administration at that time, the Bush administration, was going to war over faulty intelligence about weapons of mass destruction. And he stuck to his guns on that. One of the few who voted that way at the time.
You know, Bob Graham is chairman of the Intelligence Committee in the Senate. He objected to us going into Iraq. He thought it was wrong. And as it turned out, he was right. He was one of 5 Democrats who voted against going into Iraq. He said that it would do more to hurt us in the world of fighting terrorism. He believed going into Iraq was a waste of our resources, that we should be concentrating on going after terrorists. And as we look back over the years since then, Bob Graham was right. He also spent almost the rest of his life demanding that some secret information, top secret information that was being held back about what happened on 9/11 involving Saudi Arabia should be released. And it was gradually over the years released, but not as quickly as Bob Graham believed it should be. And he thought it was wrong that Americans weren't being told the full story.
And Brian, you covered his brief presidential bid. Among other things, he ended up having heart problems that delayed him being able to get on the trail. It never really caught on, but here was somebody, he never lost an election, 2 terms as governor, 3 terms as U.S. senator, more popular in the vote tally, each and every one. But you were there as well during his presidential bid.
Yeah, shortly after he announced his campaign in 2004 for president, he had a heart issue and had to have heart surgery, and that impacted his campaign. He got started late. I traveled with him to California and Iowa and New York. And I remember in Iowa, he found a small town and did what Bob Graham does best. He went into a diner and started waiting tables in a diner as a work day in Iowa. But you could also get the hint even then that his campaign wasn't kicking in, because while I was there and 1 or 2 other reporters from Florida were there weren't any reporters from Iowa there. And if you're going to win the Iowa caucuses, you need to have the Iowa press paying attention. But that was Bob Graham, and he spent that whole day working in the diner. And I can remember when we went to New York, we got off the plane and we got on a bus to go to a terminal. And I, at that time, had never heard of this book. This will shock some people, but he sees somebody reading a book, a woman reading a book at the back of the bus. We were standing in the front, toward the front of the bus. He turned around, walked to the back of the bus, engaged talking with this woman. And what's that book you're reading? And she said, well, Harry Potter. Oh, I've never heard of Harry Potter. And they wind up getting into a conversation about Harry Potter. That was Bob Graham. He could engage with anybody, and he genuinely enjoyed it. This woman in New York on this bus wasn't about to be voting for him for something in Florida. There wasn't a New York primary coming up. He just loved engaging with people.
Brian, final thoughts. We live in an age where our view of history is often short and where sometimes a zero-sum game. What have you done for me lately? Why did he matter to us? Final thoughts on why he mattered to all Floridians, and his legacy is one that we salute today.
Ultimately, I think that that what Bob Graham left was a legacy that showed that he genuinely cared about Floridians. And it helped him a lot that he had these work days that he did even after he didn't need to do work days anymore. And they weren't a campaign stunt. And it really got him to understand Floridians. There wasn't a job that anybody had that he didn't try to do for a full day. And it was remarkable that he didn't just do it for an hour to get a little press interest. He would do it for the entire day. And the people really, really appreciated the fact that he cared about what he was doing and his ability to, or willingness to sit down with fellow lawmakers or people while he was governor and really talk about issues and try to negotiate and not insisting that it had to be his way only is something we need to get back to. And it's a great legacy and one that will be remembered.